I didn't have any friends in elementary school. Friendship through force does not last long, but rather repels others. The more I tried, the worse it got. I had problems with eye contact when communicating, which caused me to stare at the ground, mumbling some fragments of phrases. By the 6th grade, when I was ready to give up on my attempts to make friends with at least someone, when Zach moved to the next street. Zach instantly became popular at school, even the older kids liked him. He had a subtle magnetic charisma. He also had a pet rat named Spots, which he sometimes put on his shoulder like a parrot. You felt better around Zach, you felt important. Of course, I wanted to be friends with him, but in the end, it was me. Then, after a month of 6th grade, he invited me to his birthday party. Basically, almost all of our class was there, so I assumed that his parents simply forced him. However, a week later he invited me again. We played Super Mario and watched Star Trek. It seemed that after that, others began to treat me better. Zach had no problems communicating with all the school groups. Nerds, jocks, informals. Zach could spend his time with anyone, but instead he preferred to spend his free time with me. He said you could talk to me about anything. He said he didn't need to think to impress me somehow. Looking back, Zach was more than just a friend to me. He gave me confidence. He made me feel that I was worth something, my own importance. Before I met Zach, I couldn't even look people in the eye. There was no longer that piercing feeling of loneliness. I became Zach's best friend. And thanks to this, the 6th grade became the best time of my childhood. That summer, Zach's parents divorced. He was going to move with his mother about 3 kilometers into some wilderness. Last Sunday, me and Zach brought together in my house. We ate cereal for lunch and played Mortal Kombat. I remember Zach sitting there with the beady nose of his pet rat peeking over Zach's shoulder. We hardly talked about his move. It wasn't a problem for him, I thought. He'll make new friends, and I'll be a crazy lonely kid again. All day I felt fear filling me, as if I was being pushed closer and closer to the edge of a dark bottomless pit. When Zach leaves, everything will be the same as before. I'm going to be pathetic again. When all the chilling fullness of it reached me, I put the game on pause right in the middle of the fight and almost ran to the toilet. I turned on the dryer so that nothing could be heard, sat on the edge of the bathroom and cried. I was ashamed, and I felt like an idiot because of my own tears. Then I heard Zach's knock. He asked if I was okay. Wiping my tears and washing my face, I opened the door. I remember that moment when Zach stood with a deeply concerned look, like a kind older brother. I leaned on him and we hugged. A feeling of overwhelming calm overwhelmed me. Zach told me not to worry and said everything would be fine. And that's when I noticed the blood. Pushing away from him, I blinked in confusion. And it was all over his shirt, on his hands. His expressions were strange, as if his face was in a whirlwind of different emotions. Like an actor preparing to go on stage. He grabbed my hands and started rubbing them into his shirt. I remember feeling like I was about to wake up from this nightmare. But there was no fear. I was strangely calm, right up until the moment when Zach started screaming at me, begging for his life. My mind froze in a stupor as he ran up the stairs to call for help. I entered the room, noticing the bloody scissors on the floor. Spots was nailed and opened like a test rat. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't, just like I couldn't scream. It was like I was disconnected from reality. And I turned on after Zach and my dad burst into the room. And my father looked at me like I was crazy, like I was crazy. I tried to answer, but the words stuck in my throat, squeezing out unintelligible nonsense. The father told Zach to go back to the room where it was safe. I lost consciousness from the wildness of everything that was happening. I woke up in a hospital bed, handcuffed to her. My father was already here with a policeman. They asked why I killed the rat, why I threatened to kill Zach. I was trying to explain what really happened. I'm in the toilet, Zach knocked, he's covered in blood. He wiped the blood on my hands. He screamed. He set me up. It sounded ridiculous, almost insane. Of course, Zach had already told them his story. With the only exception, he rigged the roles. He told me that I threatened him that I would cut his throat like a rat if he moved. Zach is a pathologically convincing actor. Even I began to doubt my own sanity. After these events, he moved. However, this was not our last meeting. Since then, my childhood has been divided into the time I spent outside the walls of the juvenile institution and outside of them. Everyone knew that I was the same crazy kid who cut up a rat and threatened the school hero to kill him if he moved. Everyone, including my parents, believed the story that Zach told. I realized pretty quickly that persuading people is a bad idea. They just thought it was part of my delusion. What will really haunt me for the rest of my life, giving me a feeling of sticky horror, is that Zach really loved that stupid rat. He had been with her for 2 years, even teaching her various tricks. I have recovered from many experiences. But I'll never recover from the fact that he killed someone he cared about just to give me a shit. A year passed, and we met again. My psychologist arranged a meeting to help with my recovery. Then I had already accepted defeat. I just wanted all these nightmarish psychological sessions to finally end. And I told Zach that I sincerely repent, that I would try to become a better person. Zach listened to me carefully, and when I finished, he told me to look into his eyes. He looked and forgave me. I almost burst into tears, but at the last moment I restrained myself. Despite the crazy tangle that this situation was, I remember that I felt better. It's like some part of me bought into Zach's version of reality. I know it's complete bullshit. However, I felt grateful. And days later, gratitude turned into horror again. Zach's forgiveness was just part of his game. Since then, I have continued to recover. Until I was 20, I tried everything, from psychological help to strange practices of spiritual help. Something helped a little, but the fear still remained, like white noise. Sometimes it goes quiet, but it never stops. Of course, I had clinical depression, anxiety, PTSD and serious trust issues. My relatives considered me a depressed, unbalanced psycho. And that hurt the most. I am a pacifist by nature. I have always hated any violence. I still catch spiders and let them out instead of killing them. It's still hard for me to breathe when I think about it. Sometimes I'm afraid I've become the monster he portrayed me to be. For about 8 years, vengeful rage boiled like poison in the back of my mind. Fortunately, after 30 years, the situation has changed for the better. By the time I was 30, I met Natalie. A lot of time passed before I accepted it. But she is the only person in the whole world who looks at the world from my side of this story. She even encouraged me to find Zach to restore the true state of things. I said I was looking for him, but I couldn't find him. It was a lie. I knew exactly where Zach lived, and even where he worked. One drunken night, a Facebook search led me to his page. Intoxicated with alcohol, I almost sent him a message full of pompous nonsense. The main thing is that almost, and to be honest, part of me was still afraid of him. I decided that it was better for the past to remain in the past, and it was better for me to live out my life in peace and quiet. After all, it got better when I accepted everything. Sometimes, whole days passed without memories and reflections about that incident. The white noise gradually subsided. Then I ran into Zach. I don't know if it was a crazy coincidence or a rational calculation. In any case, I turned away, and we parted in different directions, as in a sea ship. He called out to me, and I kept walking. He called out to me again, and I walked faster. "I'm sorry," he shouted. Like a stretched rope, his voice trembled from the years spent in painful introspection. I turned around. After that, we had coffee. Zach said he was in town for a business trip. What chances did we have to collide? This world is not so big. He said that he had been looking for me for years, but could not find me. He said that what happened was the greatest regret in his life. He was telling me the truth. Zach was no longer the kid who thought it would be fun to make friends with a lonely outcast and drag him into a mess before leaving. However, what he did to me was much worse. He said he enjoyed this mesmerizing moment. He added that as a teenager he was diagnosed with a tendency to psychopathic behavior. I've read about it. These are people who behave like sociopaths in adolescence, and by the age of 20 they grow out of such behavior or learn to hide better. He offered financial compensation. He also became a broker, and I refused. In response to this, he asked if I would ever forgive him. Before I spoke, I thought for a couple of long minutes and said that I would forgive him only if he told everyone the truth. My family, his family, everyone from childhood. With every word he uttered, he paled. He nodded in agreement, but added that before that he needed time to put things in order. And I understood. After that, we had an awkward chat. It turned out that we were both doing relatively well. He got married, has 2 children, a nice house and an expensive car. And I said I was engaged to my girlfriend Natalie. I didn't mention the 3 suicide attempts. Part of me felt sorry for him. I wasn't naive enough to believe him, but he seemed like a broken man trying to redeem himself. It looked sad. We awkwardly said goodbye, but I felt relieved. Perhaps it will all finally come to an end. However, it felt like something was wrong, as if Zach was hiding something. I still don't believe we met each other. A month later, everything remained in its place. No wonder. He seemed hesitant to prove by deed that he wanted to earn my forgiveness. However, I didn't blame him. He's been lying to people all his life, and the truth has its consequences. And, to be honest, I didn't care anymore. Then, at 3 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Zach. He apologized for calling in such darkness, said he couldn't sleep. He needed my forgiveness. He was afraid that he was slipping into the power of his old habits. Years of treatment had already struggled to contain the worst aspects of his illness. I could have said the words "I forgive you," but it meant absolutely nothing. He needed to confess what he had done not only to me, but to everyone. He said he couldn't. Too much depended on him, his business, his family. He couldn't risk everything. I hung up. Obviously, he has not changed and will never change. Asking for forgiveness without putting any effort into it is the most selfish thing a person can do. He called me back, but I didn't pick up the phone. After the 5th call, I changed my phone number. I never told Natalie about my second encounter with Zach. Looking back, it became one of my biggest regrets. A couple of months later, my father called me out of the blue. Panting, he said that Zach had called and confessed everything, tried to apologize for the past distrust. I blacked out in the middle of a sentence. I remember standing there for a whole minute, genuinely shocked that Zach had actually confessed. A couple more people tried to call me this week. Zach contacted everyone involved in this tangle of lies. I ignored them all. The only one I cared about was Zach himself. As I searched for his name online, my curiosity grew. As soon as he confessed, his whole life began to crack at the seams and fall apart. His marriage was on the verge of divorce. His business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Part of me felt sorry for him, but I must admit that the other part felt satisfied. Part of me wanted him to get even worse. Despite my worst premonitions, Zach fulfilled my demands. I decided to wait a couple more weeks before calling him. Everything seemed unreal, as if in a dream. I never called Zach. I didn't care, knowing that his life was nothing but scraps, gave me a feeling of happiness. I've never felt so happy. I knew it wasn't healthy, but the response felt just awesome. I guess I'm not really that good of a person. Pretty soon Azaki found out, and Natalie. And she was furious that I lied to her. It was understandable. She said I should forgive him as soon as possible. After all, he confessed. She said that only forgiveness would put an end to this nightmare. I knew she was probably right, but I wasn't ready. I needed time. We did not come to a compromise, deciding to remain with our opinions. Looking back, Zach didn't care about forgiveness, he just wanted to escape from the burden of guilt. 3 months later, I came home from work, finding Natalia at the kitchen table. It was strange because she usually came home after 8. And she was leaning over the table. Then something crunched under my foot. Flakes were scattered all over the floor. Taking Natalie by the shoulders, I turned her around. Memories are distorted when we go through traumatic events. For a couple of seconds I thought someone had replaced her with a dummy. Perhaps for some terrible prank. I know how ridiculous it sounds, but for 10 seconds it felt like reality. Then I turned on. Pulse check, nothing. Breath check, nothing. Immediately upon arrival, the paramedic announced her death. Of course, the police also came, and I became the first on the list of suspects. I almost blurted out in the heat that it was Zach, but stopped. I had to wait for my lawyer. Still, the cause of death is unknown. However, my imagination has already dispersed. Maybe Zach was trying to frame me again, maybe he was taking revenge on me for ignoring his calls. I could only laugh at the cruel absurdity of this situation. God bury modern criminology. The crime was negligent. They found a lot of Zach's DNA samples in my house. Traces of Abrin's poison were found during Natalie's autopsy. They searched Zach's house, found traces of Abrin at his house. Probably bought it on the black market. They even found his incoherent journal entries that I still did not call back. The fact that he ruined his life for my forgiveness, and I didn't forgive. He dreaded the return of his psychopathic tendencies. He will be behind bars for the rest of his days. The execution is already planned. When my friends and family finally got to know the true Lixaka, they felt terrible guilt, which I didn't care about. Natalie was the only person who believed me. Natalie knew who I really was, she knew my face. Natalia knew who I was, and she didn't need Zach's confession to understand the truth. Natalia left, and the opinions of the others were no longer important. Zach was executed a few months ago. Okay, I must admit, I distorted the truth in several things. Zach and I didn't meet by chance. I've been following him for years, studying him. Initially, I wanted him to confess everything. I wanted everyone to know that I wasn't the monster he claimed I was. But I was him. After his confession, I didn't feel anything. Even worse, the confession wasn't enough. I wanted to ruin his life the same way he ruined mine. My whole life has been fixated on just this one moment. The rest was not important. No friendship, no job, not even Natalie. I wanted to get it over with. Framing Zach was a no-brainer. It was surprisingly easy to accuse Zach of murder. Months of manic phone confessions to people from the past. The story of his violence, dragged into the light of God literally from the other world. Me, ignoring his desperate calls. Even his incoherent journal entries said that he was taking revenge on me for not forgiving him. It wasn't difficult to place his DNA at home and purchase Oberyn on the black market. Zach almost didn't resist the charges in court. He was so emotionally smeared that his own lawyers forced him to admit his guilt. The court had everything: evidence, witness testimony, motive. I would really like Natalie not to leave, but it was inevitable. I knew in my heart that she never believed me anyway. Of course, I've been able to deceive myself all these years, but I knew she doubted me. They've all always doubted me. It was evident in their eyes. Of course, I could have killed Zach, but it wasn't enough. It was necessary to make him feel on his own skin what I once felt. I needed to calm down. I wanted to end it all. I met with Zach a week before his execution. Looking through the glass, I could tell he was afraid. He looked at me like a monster who had killed his beloved to annoy someone he hated. Unable to cope with the absurd extremity of my actions, he felt the same as I once did, only 10 times sharper. He begged me to tell the truth, begged me to save his life. His family turned away from him, his own children considered him a monster. In the end, the pleas turned into rage. He said I set him up, called me a psychopath, said I was much worse than he had ever been. I just sat next to him, listening and waiting for him to run out of fuse. When he finally shut up, I asked him to look me in the eye. Sobbing, he raised his head. I forgave him.